Conventional car guy wisdom says that the best Lexus ever built was the first generation Lexus LS sedan. But that conventional wisdom would be wrong. The best Lexus is this LC500 convertible. This is arguably the flagship of the Lexus brand, with the highest starting MSRP in North America. This convertible starts at $101,000. That's a notable bump over the LC500 Coupe at $93,050 or the LC500 Hybrid at $97,610, one of the most expensive hybrids available in North America. But in typical Lexus fashion, even though this starts at $101,000, it doesn't go up to crazy numbers like you find in the Mercedes, BMW, or Audi lineup. The model that I'm driving today is essentially fully loaded right around $115,000. There's a limited edition package and a few other options that you could add to this to get it a little bit higher, but this is not going to be in the $250,000 club. The pricing scheme of this convertible and just everything about the LC500 convertible makes this the ultimate irrational car for the ultimate rational car shopper. What I really love about the LC is that with this vehicle, whether we're talking about the regular coupe, the hybrid coupe, or the convertible, Lexus is not doing the same thing that other car companies are doing. Yes, plenty of car companies have expensive 2+2 coupes, 2+2 convertibles, etc. But Lexus offers their own unique styling tweak, their own unique drivetrains. We don't have turbocharged engines under the hood. We have a relatively softly sprung suspension, a very distinctive style, and Lexus wasn't focusing on balls-out performance. So this is not going to compete with something like a BMW M8. That's not the mission of the LC500. Instead, they decided to make this a very quiet vehicle, a comfortable vehicle, even when we get the convertible top. And if you get the hybrid model, one of the most fuel-efficient entries in this segment, if you're willing to sacrifice a bit of power. I also think the LC wears the Lexus design language the best of any vehicle in their lineup right now. The grille has a really dramatic 3D design to it in addition to being shaped like the same spindle opening that we find in other Lexus models. We have a lot of the same styling cues, but they're executed differently here. So we have a tri-module LED headlight that's definitely distinctive, accent strips down below, and then the same sort of Nike swoosh that we see in other Lexus models, but it's separated a little bit from the headlamp here, but not in the same way that we found in the Lexus IS. Everything about this just seems to work for me, and I haven't been the hugest fan of the spindle grille in the past. The design is further accentuated by a low roof line, a relatively high belt line right here at the very back of the engine, and a low sloping front. It gives this almost a supercar-like proportion. The LC500 is rear-wheel drive, of course. It was designed for a 5-liter V8 to live under the hood, but you could tell that they've really drawn out the hood just to give this the proportions that it has. At 187.4 inches long, this is 2 inches longer than the Lexus RC, the least expensive two-door vehicle in the Lexus lineup. So Lexus did not target the LC at the Mercedes-Benz S-Class Coupe. That's 11 inches longer than this, and by the time we see the next generation S-Class Coupe, it's likely to be even longer. This is also not a direct corollary to the BMW 8 Series Coupe. That's about 4 inches longer than this, and they have some seriously powerful engines. Instead, Lexus decided to go on a road of their own. They gave this 2+2 proportions, so we do have teeny tiny back seats right back here. You can see how close that headrest is to the back. Now you might be wondering, what is this rear seat for? The answer is for your fancy shopping bag, so you can just pop that right back there, strap it in with the rear seat belts if you need to, or of course you could put your Chihuahua or your fluffy dog back there as well, as long as their little claws aren't digging into the seat. And then there's likely insurance rates. That's the other reason that we have those back seats. Pretty much everybody is going to be sitting up front. In addition to the impeccable build quality, another thing I love about the LC are the concept car-like touches. We get big wheels, big meaty tires on them. These are 21-inch wheels, and then really accentuated body sculpting. Big wheel wells. This wheel well comes almost all the way up to the hood level, deeply sculpted back end, and then a really high deck lid back here as well that really accentuates the very sports car or performance car-like proportions that we find in this. But this is not a hardcore performance vehicle like the Lexus LFA, even though obviously you can see some sort of inspiration in this design from that high-performance Lexus. This is just a better vehicle all around than the LFA. The LFA wasn't really a daily driver livable vehicle. That was made for a really wealthy person that loved Lexuses to be able to buy one, take it out on the track, but really spend most of its time in the garage. This, on the other hand, is made for people that drive their Lexus every day and simply want the ultimate and most stylish Lexus available. Some of the design features that we find in the LC500 have been repeated in other Lexus models, but likely for cost reasons, not all of them have, like these really cool LED lights. This has the Lexus swoosh inside, but it's repeated 4 times over, going further back into the tail lamp module. It's a pretty deep tail lamp module, and it really gives it a very 3D effect. There's an LED turn signal down here, another LED on the side, and then this has a highly polished nature to it. So on that side, you can see that it actually looks a little bit white on the camera. That's because you can really very clearly see the rock wall that's on this side outside of the field of view of the camera, and it reflects that right there in the tail lamp module. We have well integrated parking sensors, dual exhaust tips at the bottom, and Lexus hides the trunk release right here inside the passenger side tail lamp module. Since this is a convertible, it's now time to talk about the top. This is a soft top convertible, not a hard top convertible, and I am a little bit disappointed that you cannot operate the top via the remote. You have to press a button in the center console. The top is pretty quick operating. It takes 16 seconds to close the top and 15 seconds to open the top. But I'm just going to stop it right here so we can take a look at what's going on. You'll notice that the top descends into a section in front of the trunk. So this lid opens, the top comes out of it. Once the top is completely latched into place up front, this section will then go back into place, and then the window will then seal on top of this. This is a 4-layer soft top design. It's got a lot of layers going on in order to help improve cabin quietness. That's one of the ways this gets to a pretty quiet cabin, even though this is a soft top design. I'll go ahead and finish the operation here so you can see what that looks like when it's completely closed. Lexus has done a really good job with this top. I think it works with the shape of the LC. They've done a really good job integrating it, making it look like the LC was intended to have the soft top from the very beginning. It's a little bit difficult to tell. Lexus is a little cagey as to whether the LC was designed from the ground up to be a convertible or not. I suspect it might not have been because the controls are a little bit oddly located on the interior, and I would have assumed if they had planned this from the very beginning that they may have had a different position for some of the controls. We'll talk about that when we get on the inside. But this is a 4-layer soft top, so this is one of the quietest soft tops that you can buy. Under the hood, power comes from one of the last naturally aspirated V8 engines you'll find in a luxury car. This is a 5-liter V8 producing 471 horsepower and 398 pound-feet of torque. This is the same basic engine that we find in the Lexus RCF and we will find in the upcoming IS500, but there are a few subtle tweaks from vehicle to vehicle. Since this is not an F engine, we don't have the blue valve covers on the top of the engine, and rather than an 8-speed automatic, this is mated to Lexus's newer 10-speed automatic transmission. 18 miles per gallon is the combined EPA rating, and there's an available limited slip differential, which I would definitely get. There have been rumors that Lexus might create an LCF at some point in the future, but those rumors have neither been confirmed nor denied, and some of the rumors are indicating that that may have been canceled. If you get the non-convertible model, you can get a 354 horsepower hybrid system that is quite unique in this segment because it's not a plug-in hybrid and it's not an overt performance-oriented hybrid. Instead, it's focused at fuel economy, and that will get you 29 miles per gallon. Logically, cargo capacity varies based on the model that you get. If you get the non-hybrid LC500 Coupe, you get 5.4 cubic feet of storage space. If you get the hybrid model, that drops down to 4.7 cubic feet because the battery goes right over there where the convertible top is going in, but it's not quite as large as the convertible top, so the convertible model drops even further down to 3.4 cubic feet. Now, the battery's location is the reason you cannot get an LC500 hybrid convertible. I'm a little bit disappointed in that, but the battery pack does essentially go into the area where the convertible top descends into. At 3.4 cubic feet, this cargo area is not terribly big. I was able to fit one 24-inch roller bag in here and two 22-inch roller bags. So this is the kind of vehicle where you can take luggage for a weekend away, but definitely make sure to pack light. It's still a pretty comfortable cargo area, however. It is relatively wide, but as you can see, it's not going to score terribly highly on the exclusive trunk comfort index. I think I'm going to have to give it 3 out of 10 points because it looks like it's really more of an Alex on Auto's guillotine right here than a trunk. The Lexus LC and the Lexus LS, their flagship sedan, are relatively closely related, and the two share interior styling, but not everything about the interior is directly shared, and the seats are not shared for some odd reason. So we get less comfortable seats in the LC versus the LS, and less adjustable as well. The LS has some fantastically adjustable seats with a million ways of motion, Lexus's latest massage feature, etc. Instead, here we get a 2-way adjustable lumbar support and a multi-way adjustable driver's seat without inflatable side cushions or an extending thigh cushion, things that you do find in other Lexus vehicles. We still have a powered tilt telescopic steering column with a 3-position memory on the door, however. But another point of differentiation between this and the LS sedan is that even though we have a power passenger seat with the same range of motion, we don't find memory settings on the passenger door like we do find in the LS. Vehicles like the LC are frequently referred to as 2+2 vehicles because we have two very comfortable seats up front and two nearly unusable seats behind. Yes, I suppose you could adjust this seat right like that, and then maybe a 5'4", 5'2" person could drive the vehicle while I was sitting behind, but it would definitely be uncomfortable for everybody involved. There's just not a lot of room back here, and the rear seat cushion is pretty close to the floor. Instead, again, these seats are best reserved for your luggage, your pets, your purse, that sort of thing. Also kind of quirky, there's no button to open just these side windows back here, either in the rear section or for the driver or front passenger. You have to use the one button that raises and lowers all four windows at the same time. It's also worth noting that if I were to try and put the top up, there's not a lot of room back here. Let's go ahead and give that a whirl. Again, the top is pretty quick. Thankfully, it is softly padded. Ooh, yeah. And again, almost down there. And again, thankfully a soft top. Ooh, yeah, because I would just basically have to sit here in the fetal position the entire time the vehicle was in motion. Although I'm not the biggest fan of this interior color combination, the build quality in here is excellent, and keep in mind the LC500 is available in a wide variety of different colors aside from this brown on brown design. We have neck warmers, just as you'd expect in a modern convertible, two-way adjustable headrests here, a lot of different stitching going on. These seats are both heated and ventilated, so we find a perforated center section. Behind the front seats, there's a removable wind deflector if you don't have anybody in the back seats. And if you do have people in the back seat, there is a really tiny plexiglass wind deflector right behind those back seats. You'll find the subwoofer between the two rear seats, and the rear seat belts are held in place by those magnetic snaps. That's to keep them from flapping around in the wind. Moving back up front, we have moderately aggressive bolstering on the front seats, as you'd expect in a vehicle with a performance mission, and definitely very stylized doors. I have to say that this design is very unique, and although it's not exactly my cup of tea, I really appreciate the fact that Lexus went somewhere different with this design. If I zoom in on this center section, perhaps a little bit more quickly there, you can see that it has a definite texture to it that we don't normally find in interiors. I love the fact that every aspect of the LC, Lexus went ahead and did their own thing, including this door handle up here that just seems to float right out of the door. We have two very large grabs, one on the door and one on the center console for the passenger. This vehicle has a carbon fiber sill that's available, and then a pretty deep storage pocket there for a convertible. Moving over to the dashboard, the general design is very much like the Lexus LS, but not exactly the same. So not all the shapes and things going on here are directly corollaries for that larger sedan. One of the more noticeable differences are the air vents on the passenger side. We have two air vents that are almost pointing at the ceiling right there, and then one larger air vent on the side. This button over here opens the glove compartment. It's a fairly small glove compartment. It's mainly a slot style compartment. I was not able to fit a large tablet computer inside. Moving to the center of the dashboard, we have an analog clock and a large infotainment LCD, although this is a little bit smaller than some of the other modern Lexuses out there. As you can see, it supports Apple CarPlay integration, but this does not have a touchscreen like we find in some other modern Lexuses. It has yet to be updated for that. The display is a little bit far from the driver. You can really see that the rest of the dashboard cascades away from that LCD infotainment system. The infotainment system is where we find the controls for the seat heaters, seat ventilation, and the headrest heating as well. That's because Lexus seems to intend for you to use their Lexus Concierge option here, where the car will automatically heat or ventilate the seats as needed based on the inside temperature, the outside temperature, and the temperature that you've requested. Continuing down the dash, we have the engine start-stop button there, the controls for the dual-zone automatic climate control, an optical disc player. We have a pretty small cup holder right there. It's one of the round variety. That's right next to some of the controls for the infotainment system here. Track forward, backward, tune, volume, direct access buttons there, and then the Lexus Control touchpad that we find in other Lexus models. There's a joystick style shifter here, but it's a little bit different than some of Lexus's other shifters. There's no unlock button. We simply pull down there for drive, push over and forward for reverse, back for manual, right like that, and then hit the park button. That's similar to some of Lexus's other hybrids. There's a brake hold button right there. Under this little area, which sort of seems like it should have sort of a torpedo launch button, this is where we find the controls for the windows. This is the only way you can open and close those little quarter windows behind the main windows. Then we have a control for the powered top. Behind that, we have a center console that opens to reveal another sort of cup holder. It's a square area that you can use as a cup holder, and then I can open this all the way and have access for the two USB ports that interface with that infotainment system and a moderately sized storage compartment. Remember, this is a rear-wheel drive vehicle, so obviously there's not going to be as much storage as you'd find in something like a Lexus RX. Lexus appears to be rolling out larger LCD instrument clusters in some of their newer vehicles, but the LC, being an older design, still has a 7-inch LCD cluster with a movable center ring. It goes side to side like we find in some of the F and F Sport vehicles out there. When it's in the central position, we have some auxiliary gauges on either side. When it's in the collapsed position, we have access to a different variety of menus, some vehicle customization settings, infotainment readouts, turn-by-turn navigation directions, and then, of course, the status of the vehicle's active safety systems. The steering wheel is a large, thickly rimmed round design with perforated leather sections on each side and large metal paddle shifters on the back, up on the right, down on the left. The buttons on the steering wheel are similar to what we find in the LS. These control the radar adaptive cruise control on this side, along with the lane keeping button. We then have track forward, backward on the right, volume up, down on the left, and then these buttons control that multifunction LCD. There's also a phone button and a dedicated voice control button. One of the odd things about the LC is that not all of the electronic systems are the same as the larger LS sedan, even though this is a bit more expensive. So we don't have the same kind of heads-up display. This is a smaller full-color unit. And we find a relatively small standard aspect ratio backup cam rather than a 360-degree camera system like you find in the LS. Out on the road, this is exactly the kind of vehicle that I tend to gravitate toward if left to my own devices. The suspension is softly sprung, the engine has a great exhaust note to it, performance is definitely very good. 0 to 60 happens in 4.5 seconds. This vehicle has an active exhaust system to it, so in normal driving it's fairly civilized and fairly quiet, but if you romp on it, you definitely get all those kinds of cracks, pops, and burbles that you might expect out of a performance vehicle. If I put this in the manual transmission modes, you also get some lovely rev match shifts with those extra burbles and pops in it, but you can also just put this back in the drive mode, hang out in comfort, and just drive it like a normal luxury car. But if you're in more of a relaxed mode, you can just pop it back in drive, set it to the comfort mode, and it drives just like a big Grand Tourer. Interestingly, this is not that big, of course, but it does feel like a big luxury two-door vehicle. And that's thanks to the way the suspension is tuned and the curb weight. This weighs about 4,500 pounds, so this is no lightweight sports car. That's because we have that large 5-liter V8 engine under the hood, and engine weight is one of those reasons that we see a lot of other car companies moving to exotic materials or turbocharged engines in order to improve power and improve performance. 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds is no slouch. That is perfectly respectable, but you will certainly find faster 0 to 60 times among the Germans. But again, the tuning of the LC is definitely more my preference. If I were to buy a vehicle in this category myself, I would probably have this right at the top of my shopping list. There's just something incredibly pleasing about the way a naturally aspirated V8 engine builds power, and just the noise that is completely unadulterated because there's no turbocharger, there's no supercharger in the way. All we get is the sweet, sweet sound of that 5-liter V8 engine. And if you're the kind of person that's interested in buying a vehicle like this rather than leasing it, keep in mind that a naturally aspirated 5-liter V8 like this is going to be a lot less expensive to keep around long term. Although the LC is no lightweight and the suspension is definitely tuned towards the more comfortable side of things, handling is excellent in this vehicle. Lexus really has a knack when it comes to giving us a really precise and really good feeling steering rack. Lexus also likes to put a little bit more weight up front than in some of the competition. So this one has about 52% of its weight over the front axle. Lexus could have very easily shifted some of the weight rearward, or they could have given this a 50-50 weight balance if they had wanted to, but they specifically chose to give it a slight front heavy weight balance because it tends to make the handling a little bit more predictable. And the LC is all about that very predictable, very easy to live with nature. This is the kind of vehicle where you want to drive it on every weekend you can, rather than just simply the weekends where the weather is good and the road is perfect. Out on a rougher road like the one that I'm on here, or even out on a roughly paved highway, you'll notice that the suspension is a little bit unusually tuned in the Lexus LC. This definitely has a comfortable mission to it, and when it's in the comfort mode, we definitely get more of a floaty style ride to it. But there isn't as much suspension travel as you might think in a vehicle like this, with this sort of softer suspension tune. That's just due to the general design of the vehicle. There's really nowhere for those tires and wheels to go in those wheel openings. And as a result, you do end up with an unusual feeling over larger bumps because there just isn't the kind of suspension travel that you might expect in order to soak it up. So the suspension has to get a little firmer there towards the end, and perhaps every now and then even hit a bump stop or two. So personally, I find normal to be the best suspension mode for the LC. I think it's the best suited to the personality, except if you're out on long open highway journeys where you really want the softest ride and you don't mind perhaps a moment of the suspension feeling unsettled over a really big bump. And then if I put this into Sport or Sport Plus, things certainly firm up, but this is never going to be as firm as some of those really hardcore performance options like a BMW M8. Thanks to the 4-layer soft top, cabin noise is very well controlled. I measured just 72 decibels in here at 50 miles an hour. Obviously, there are going to be quieter vehicles out there, and the LC500 Coupe is quieter than this, but the top is surprisingly quiet. And even in strong sun, thanks to those extra layers, it doesn't quite feel as hot as some of the soft tops out there can feel. It's again not going to feel quite as cool as a hard top that has a bit more insulation, but it does a reasonable job of keeping out the sun. And that's pretty important because the soft top in this model is black, and if you live in a climate that's pretty toasty, this interior can get warm. I'm not entirely concerned that folks shopping for a $100,000 luxury coupe or convertible are really that interested in fuel economy. If you are, you might want to get the LC500 hybrid. It really will give you 30 miles per gallon in mixed driving. This vehicle, on the other hand, will be right around 18 to 19 miles per gallon. I have rather surprisingly averaged 19 mpg over a week of mixed driving. That's likely because even though this does have a 5-liter naturally aspirated V8, it's a relatively modern V8 engine design, and it definitely has fuel economy in mind. It also has a really great engine exhaust note. I know I keep saying that, but the engine sound is just absolutely lovely in this vehicle. I think the only thing that could make the LC500 even more perfect is if Lexus had somehow figured out a way to stuff one of their all-wheel drive systems under the hood. Bottom line, the LC500 convertible is such an easy vehicle to live with, whether you're taking it slow out on your favorite winding mountain road, or you just want to rip it up and have a little bit of extra fun. This is never going to grab the road like an Acura NSX or something like that, but this is more practical, more daily driver livable, and in some ways, I hate to say it, better as well. It may be odd to talk about the NSX in the same sentence with an LC500 convertible because they're very, very different vehicles, but I could logically see people cross-shopping these two vehicles. That's a daily driver livable supercar. This is a more daily driver focused convertible. But I honestly think this is better in so many different ways. It's more comfortable, the technology feels more modern, the interior is better put together. It feels more special outside of the insane performance and handling numbers, obviously, that we find in the NSX. I would just get the LC500, I think. Starting at $101,100, the LC500 convertible is the most expensive Lexus model in the lineup, but oddly it has another distinction. It has one of the narrowest pricing ranges. In fact, I think it's the narrowest pricing range in the Lexus window, because there are only $9,000 of options that you can add on to the LC500. While this is a 6-figure vehicle, it also ends up being rather an odd luxury value, because when you compare this against a Porsche 911 or a BMW or a Mercedes or an Audi in a similar price range, you get a lot more content on the LC500, and I have to say, I really love the look. With that out of the way, let's run through some of the competition. For some reason, the first competitor that comes to mind, for me at least, is the Porsche 911 Cabrio. The Cabrio will actually start more than the LC500's top-end price. So you will always be paying more for that topless 911 than the LC500. I know this is a matter of personal opinion, a matter of debate, but I find the LC500 more attractive than the 911. I'm not the biggest fan of the Lexus spindle grille, but I have to say that the LC500 really changed my mind on that because it really looks like that grille was designed for this vehicle. Or at least the vehicle was designed around the grille from the very beginning. It wasn't simply added on to later, like we find in some of the Lexus vehicles in their lineup, where quite literally the grille was added on later. I also love the fact that the LC500 is quite a bit rarer than the 911. Not only has it not been out terribly long, but it sells pretty slowly, so chances are you will not see another LC500 on the road, but you will see a decent number of 911s out there. For some folks out there, that could be a good thing. For some people, it may not. Next up, we have the BMW 8 Series. The 840i is less expensive, the M850 is more, and performance for the LC500 slots somewhere in between. This is probably the closest vehicle to the LC500 in the BMW lineup, but the LC feels a little bit lighter, a little bit more nimble, and I have to say the engine sounds a little bit better as well. It has a naturally aspirated V8 engine under the hood. It's not going to give you the thrust that you find in a turbocharged V8, but the sound is absolutely incredible. I also love the way that Lexus has tuned the LC. They haven't decided to go after the rock-hard performance suspension setups that we find in some of the competition. So versus the M850, even though that's not a full-on M8, the BMW feels a little bit firmer, a little bit less relaxed out on the road than the Lexus. In the Mercedes lineup, there isn't quite as direct of a corollary. Mercedes has a ton of different convertibles and roadsters, and the LC500 sort of slots in the world between an E-Class Cabrio perhaps and an SL Roadster, perhaps somewhere between there and the AMG GT. It's certainly not an S-Class convertible, however. The S-Class convertible is absolutely enormous. It has a huge back seat. It's not an emergency back seat, and it is really softly sprung. We're also going to be seeing an all-new S-Class convertible at some point in time, but you can bet that it is going to be as expensive as the current S-Class topless. Bottom line, the LC500 convertible I think is quite simply the best Lexus available today. It focuses on all the core Lexus values of a reliable drivetrain, a comfortable and elegant interior, a quiet ride, a soft ride. Everything about it exudes comfort, luxury, and elegance, and I have to say I like the design as well. Let me know what you think about that down there, because a number of people I have met this week thought that this was absolutely the ugliest car that they have ever seen in person, so I would love to know what you think about the LC's design. Hit me up down there in the comment section. Find me over at facebook.com/AlexNautilus, Instagram, all those other social places, and I'll see all of you later.